On a quiet summer morning outside Las Vegas, a mother walked toward her son's bedroom expecting nothing more than another ordinary day. What she found instead would permanently fracture her understanding of her family, her home, and the man she thought she knew. Lying beneath the covers was her 46-year-old son's body, motionless, soaked in blood, and missing its head. Not hidden, not nearby. Gone, completely removed from the scene. There was no sign of a struggle, no weapon in sight, no obvious explanation for how a human being could be decapitated inside a suburban home without waking anyone else inside. The room was unnervingly clean, the air thick with the burning sting of bleach and ammonia. So strong, in fact, that officers struggled to breathe as they stood beside the bed. And then something even more disturbing happened. Smoke began to rise from the body itself, as if the crime scene were still reacting to whatever had been done there hours earlier. At first glance, it looked like madness, a ritual, something impulsive and unexplainable. But as detectives would soon learn, this murder did not come from chaos. It came from secrets, layered, calculated, and deeply personal. A secret marriage, a twisted family dynamic, a woman living multiple identities, a son caught in a relationship that should never have existed, and a man at the center of it all who may have known too much and trusted the wrong person. This was not a random act of violence, this was not an accident, and this was not a crime driven by sudden rage. What followed would expose one of the most disturbing family betrayals in modern true crime, a case where love became leverage, intimacy became motive, and the truth was literally dismembered in an attempt to make it disappear. This is the murder of Johnathan Willette, and this is Last Witness. Johnathan Willette was not the kind of man associated with danger, secrecy, or violence. To neighbors, clients, and friends across the Las Vegas Valley, he was dependable, upbeat, and endlessly talkative.
Me Fox House.
Yeah, man.
I gotta send a shout out to DJ, moving in his new house. Congratulations.
My
and then
dog.
picking the Vegas moving guy.
He was the guy who showed up early, worked hard, cracked jokes, and treated strangers like friends he just hadn't met yet. As the face of his moving company, known online as the Vegas Moving Guy, Johnathan built a reputation on reliability. His truck and trailer were a common sight around the city, and his social media was filled with smiling selfies, customer shout-outs, and lighthearted banter. From the outside, his life looked busy, honest, and stable. But stability was something Johnathan chased, not something he truly had. Behind the cheerful persona was a man juggling fractured relationships, unresolved emotional ties, and a family structure so tangled that even those closest to him only understood fragments of it. Johnathan was a father of 3, fiercely protective of his children and deeply invested in being present in their lives. 2 of those children, young daughters, were shared with Devin Michaels, a woman whose presence in his life would later become central to the investigation into his death. Their relationship had long since ended romantically, but it never truly dissolved. Custody arrangements, shared responsibilities, and lingering emotional dependence kept them tethered to one another long after the intimacy was supposed to be over. Johnathan's eldest child, a son named Davier, was born from an earlier relationship. As a teenager and young adult, Davier had once worked alongside his father. For a time they were close. But as Davier grew older, the balance of power between father and son shifted, and then fractured completely. What Johnathan would eventually discover about his son's private life would shatter whatever trust remained between them and ignite tensions that could no longer be contained. In the months leading up to his death, Jonathan's personal life was in motion. He had recently ended an engagement with another woman. He was in the process of moving out of his mother Yoko's home, where he had been staying, and back into Devin's house to rebuild what he described as a traditional family for the sake of his daughters. To Johnathan, this move represented a reset, a chance to stabilize his children's lives and reclaim a sense of order. To others, it looked like a dangerous step backward into unresolved conflict. What Johnathan did not fully grasp, or perhaps refused to confront, was that the family he was trying to reunite no longer existed in the form he imagined. Devin was no longer just the mother of his children. She was also secretly the wife of his son, and that secret sat at the center of everything that would follow. The stage for this crime was not set overnight. It was built slowly, through silence, denial, and relationships that crossed lines no one wanted to acknowledge. By the time Johnathan lay dead in his childhood bedroom, head removed and evidence scrubbed with chemicals, the violence itself was only the final act. The real story had been unfolding for years, behind closed doors, hidden in text messages, and buried beneath lies told to protect a reality too disturbing to admit. Devin Michaels was not a woman easily defined, and that would become one of the most dangerous aspects of her presence in Johnathan Willette's life. To some, she was Devin, the mother struggling to raise two young daughters while managing chronic health issues. To others, she was Nikki Fairchild, or Tracy Tavares, or Sally B.S., names she had used at different points in her life, each tied to a different version of herself. Even within the same social circles, people knew different Devins, each one carefully curated depending on who was asking and what she needed them to believe. To Jonathan's mother, Yoko, she was Nikki, a familiar, if complicated, presence. Devin had been part of Jonathan's life for years, long enough to feel like family, even after their romantic relationship ended. She remained involved through co-parenting, shared responsibilities, and the constant negotiation of what was best for the girls. But behind that surface-level cooperation was a far more disturbing reality, one that Devin worked hard to keep hidden. Years earlier, while still connected to Jonathan, Devin had entered into a clandestine relationship with his teenage son, Devier. What began when he was barely an adult evolved into a secret marriage that no one in Jonathan's immediate family knew about. Not even Yoko. To the outside world, Devin was still simply Jonathan's ex and the mother of his daughters. In private, she was Devier's wife. The implications of that relationship were not just morally disturbing, they created a web of conflicting loyalties that would soon become impossible to manage. When police first interviewed Devin after Jonathan's body was discovered, her account of events was confusing, contradictory, and constantly shifting. She described herself as someone trying to make a family work, insisting that her relationships, both with Jonathan and with Devier, were not sexual, not romantic, and not emotionally entangled. She claimed that her marriage to Devier was one of convenience, meant to give him legal authority to help care for her and the children due to her medical conditions. But that story began to unravel almost immediately. When detectives searched Devin's home on Porcupine Rim, they found evidence that directly contradicted her claims. There were wedding photographs showing a traditional ceremony, Devin and Devier smiling, embracing, clearly in love. There were family portraits featuring the two of them with the girls, posed like any other nuclear family. And most damning of all, there were handwritten letters, pages and pages of them, written by Devin to Devier, expressing devotion, longing, and emotional dependence. In one, she wrote that she was his forever, mind, body, and soul. This was not a marriage of convenience. It was a relationship built on obsession. Those letters also revealed volatility. Devin's affection could turn to rage in an instant, particularly when Devier attempted to leave her. At one point, after he fled to California to escape the relationship, Devin threatened him with pregnancy, telling him she would have his child and expose him as the father if he did not return. He did return, and with his return, the control Devin exerted over him tightened. As detectives pieced this together, a troubling pattern emerged. Devin did not simply lie to protect herself. She lied to maintain power. Every version of her story served a purpose: to minimize her involvement, redirect suspicion, or preserve her influence over the people around her. And as Jonathan moved closer to re-entering her household, threatening that fragile balance, the stakes escalated rapidly. Jonathan was not just moving back in, he was reclaiming his role as father, provider, and authority figure, and in doing so, he was stepping directly into the middle of a relationship that should never have existed, one built on secrecy, manipulation, and fear of exposure. By the afternoon of August 6, 2023, Johnathan Willette was already living inside the last chapter of his life, though no one around him recognized it yet. Cell phone data, surveillance footage, and transaction records would later allow investigators to reconstruct his final hours with unsettling precision. What emerged was not a chaotic series of events, but a controlled, deliberate progression, one that pointed toward intent rather than impulse. Jonathan spent much of that day with Devin Michaels. Together, they ran errands across the Las Vegas Valley, shopping for back-to-school supplies for their daughters and moving Jonathan's belongings between homes. On camera, Jonathan appeared relaxed. At a gas station stop that evening, he smiled as he walked in and out of the store, joking with the cashier. There was nothing in his demeanor to suggest fear or conflict. To an outside observer, it looked like a family working toward reconciliation, but appearances were deceiving. By 8 p.m., Devin and Jonathan arrived at Yoko Willette's home on Paladora Drive in Henderson, the house where Jonathan had been staying. Devin's Nissan Armada was parked off to the side, partially obscured from view. Over the next several hours, the pair made multiple trips between the Paladora house and Devin's home on Porcupine Rim, using Jonathan's moving truck to transport his belongings. At around 11 p.m., a neighbor's security camera captured movement near Devon's Nissan. Someone unlocked the vehicle, opened the driver's door, and placed an unidentified item inside. Shortly afterward, the SUV was repositioned closer to the house, deliberately moved out of the camera's direct view. Investigators would later interpret. Less than an hour later, Devon's Nissan was captured leaving the Paladura house at 2:04 a.m. Cell phone tracking showed Devon's phone and Johnathan's phone traveling together toward Porcupine Rim. One detail stood out. Johnathan's phone, later found with his blood on it, was no longer with him. It was with Devon. At 2:29 a.m., Devon stopped at a CVS drive-through pharmacy to pick up a prescription for one of her daughters. Surveillance footage showed her calmly interacting with the employee, sipping water, wearing the same white tank top she had worn earlier that evening. There was still no visible blood, no panic, no urgency. By the time she arrived home just after 3 a.m., Johnathan Willette was already dead. What happened inside that bedroom between 10:12 p.m. and 2:04 a.m. would become the central question of the case. There were no eyewitnesses, no screams reported, no weapon recovered, and yet, by sunrise, Johnathan's body would be discovered decapitated, chemically burned, and staged in a way that suggested someone had gone to extreme lengths to erase what they had done. When first responders entered Johnathan Willette's bedroom on the morning of August 7th, they were confronted not just with a body, but with a puzzle. Johnathan's body lay face down in the bed, partially covered by sheets. He was undressed beneath them. Nearby on the floor were his boxer shorts, casually discarded. Two belts were knotted together and left close to the bed, an unsettling detail that initially suggested restraint, but it was the absence, rather than the presence, of blood that troubled investigators the most. Given the severity of the injuries, the amount of blood visible simply did not make sense. Bottles of bleach and ammonia sat in the hallway outside the bathroom, their fumes heavy enough to cause officers' eyes and throats to burn. The longer they stood in the room, the worse it became. Then someone noticed something else, something deeply unnatural: smoke. Thin wisps appeared to be rising from beneath Johnathan's body, as if the bed itself were reacting to whatever chemicals had been poured onto him. Officers worked quickly, photographing the scene as fast as possible in case a fire ignited. This was not a natural post-mortem process. This was the result of a deliberate chemical reaction, one created by someone attempting to clean, destroy, or conceal evidence. The medical examiner could not determine Johnathan's precise cause of death. With his head missing and his body chemically damaged, the chemicals, the missing head, the absence of a murder weapon, even the lack of blood suggested either extensive cleanup or that parts of the crime may have occurred elsewhere. Whoever staged that bedroom wanted investigators to doubt what they were seeing, but even the most thorough cleanup leaves traces. Elsewhere in the house, officers found nothing that could explain where Johnathan's head had gone. No saw, no knife, no blood-soaked towels, no trash bags, no sign of hurried disposal, which meant one thing: the evidence had already been removed from the home, likely within hours of the killing, and there was only one person known to have left the house during that window. As disturbing as the crime scene at Paladura Drive was, it was not where the investigation truly began to take shape. That shift happened miles away, at Devon Michael's home on Porcupine Rim, where evidence surfaced that Johnathan Willette had never intended to leave behind. When detectives arrived at Devon's house, they immediately noticed something out of place even before stepping inside. Lying in the grass near the driveway was a cell phone. Its screen was smudged with a dark substance. When tested, that substance was confirmed to be blood. The phone belonged to Johnathan, and that blood was his. That single discovery changed everything. Cell phone data showed that Johnathan's phone had traveled from Paladura to Porcupine Rim in the early hours of the morning, after he was believed to be dead. It had not gone with him, it had gone with Devon. The implications were unavoidable. Someone had removed his phone from the house after his death and carried it away, blood and all. Inside Devon's bedroom, the discoveries became even more damning. In the back of a dresser drawer, among her personal clothing, detectives found Johnathan's driver's license and the keys to his truck. They were wrapped carefully in layers of plastic bags, hidden rather than misplaced. Elsewhere, inside a small backpack-style purse, officers located Johnathan's social security card. These were not items he would have casually left behind. They were essential, personal, and deliberately concealed. None of this aligned with Devon's initial statements. She had told police that Johnathan was still alive when she left Paladura, that he was breathing, that she had simply struck him once in response to unwanted advances and walked away. But if that were true, how did his phone, covered in his blood, end up in her yard? How did his keys and identification get wrapped and hidden inside her home? Then there were the cleaning products. The bleach and ammonia found at Paladura were the same brands Devon kept in her own house. Testing revealed her DNA on the bottles left at the scene. She claimed Johnathan had used cleaning chemicals before, but investigators knew these substances had been applied after his death, not during normal household cleaning. When detectives confronted Devon with these inconsistencies, her explanations shifted again. She suggested that Johnathan had cut his hand earlier in the day while moving furniture, accounting for the blood on his phone. But the medical examiner found no injuries to Jonathan's hands, no cuts, no abrasions, no bleeding wounds. The only bleeding injury on his entire body was at the neck. The truth was tightening around her. Still, Devon denied everything. She insisted she had no memory of decapitating Johnathan, claimed blackouts, medical conditions, confusion. She described the events as dreamlike, unreal, something that happened around her rather than because of her. But the evidence was not forgotten. When Devon Michaels was finally brought in for a formal interrogation, investigators were not looking for theatrics. They were looking for consistency. What they got instead was a shifting narrative, one that bent and twisted under even the most basic scrutiny. From the moment questioning began, Devon positioned herself as both cooperative and misunderstood. She spoke freely, offering long explanations, emotional detours, and medical justifications for her memory lapses. She acknowledged striking Johnathan that night, but carefully framed it as an act of self-protection rather than violence. According to her, Johnathan had made an unwanted advance while she was giving him a massage in his bedroom. She said she walked across the room, grabbed an object from a shelf, something wooden, though she could not clearly identify it, and struck him once on the head. She was adamant about one point. Johnathan was still alive when she left. She described seeing his chest rise and fall. She insisted he was breathing in the darkness, and she repeatedly emphasized that she did not decapitate him.
I hit him. He was breathing. I didn't.
I didn't know he was breathing.
You could tell when a person was breathing.
Okay.
The chest goes up and down.
Okay, you said it was dark.
You could still know when someone was breathing.
In the dark.
It's not pitch dark, but yeah, it's not.
So you can't see an area on his head because it's so dark, but you can see his chest moving?
In her version of events, the horror discovered by Yoko the next morning was something that happened after she was already gone, something she could not explain, but this version of events collapsed under its own weight. Investigators pointed out the obvious contradictions. Jonathan's body had not been moved. He was found exactly where Devon said she left him, on the bed. If someone else had entered the house afterward, where were the signs of forced entry? Where were the footprints? Where was the weapon? And why would a second attacker decapitate a body and then meticulously clean the scene only to leave it in the same position? When confronted with the chemical burns, Devon claimed no memory of using cleaning products. When shown the missing head, she expressed shock, insisting she did not even know it had been removed until detectives told her. Her responses oscillated between emotional distress and sudden flashes of anger, particularly when investigators pressed her on the items found in her home. The phone, the keys, the identification. She could not explain why these things were with her if Johnathan was still alive when she left. She claimed he had asked her to keep them safe, that he trusted her, that she was just helping. Then investigators delivered the most damning blow. They explained that Jonathan's phone, covered in his blood, had traveled with her after she left Paladura. At the center of that structure was control. Johnathan held legal custody of his 2 daughters. That fact shaped every dynamic in this case. Devon Michaels did not have full custody. Her access to the children, her identity as a mother, was conditional, negotiated, and fragile. Johnathan was not just an ex-partner, he was a gatekeeper. As long as he lived, Devon's life was tethered to his decisions. In the weeks before his death, Johnathan was preparing to move back into Devon's home. On the surface, this looked like reconciliation. A blended family, stability for the children, but investigators saw something far more dangerous forming beneath that narrative. Jonathan's return would have collapsed the secret world Devon had built. Her husband, Jonathan's son, could not exist in the same house as Johnathan without the truth detonating. The marriage was already socially and legally indefensible. With Johnathan under the same roof, the situation would become impossible to hide, impossible to manage, and impossible to control. And control mattered to Devon. Messages, journals, and testimony revealed a pattern. When Devon felt abandoned, she escalated. When her relationship slipped from her grasp, she used leverage. Pregnancy claims, emotional pressure, guilt, and manipulation to pull people back. The man who once sustained Devon's household was beginning to reassert independence. That independence endangered everything. If Johnathan moved in, he could reclaim parental authority. If he stayed out, he controlled access to the children. If he left entirely, Devon risked losing both stability and identity. In every scenario, Johnathan remained the obstacle. The night of August 6th was not spontaneous. It was the culmination of pressure, a convergence of jealousy, fear, and loss of control. Devon did not need to plan every detail to understand the outcome she wanted. Removing Johnathan solved every problem at once. No custody disputes, no exposure of the marriage, no financial gatekeeping. When Devon Michaels' case went to trial, the defense made a calculated decision. They would not attempt to explain away the brutality of Johnathan Willette's death. They would not deny that a murder had occurred. Instead, they would redirect the horror, away from Devon and toward someone far closer to Johnathan, his own son. From the opening statements, the defense planted a single, corrosive idea in the jury's mind. What if the wrong person was sitting at the defense table? They argued that investigators had made a fatal mistake early in the case, locking onto Devon Michaels too quickly and ignoring an alternative suspect with equal access, equal motive, and greater technical ability. That suspect was Willette. The defense framed Deviere as a young man under extraordinary pressure. He was married, secretly, to his stepmother. He lived in a house built on deception, and now Johnathan was coming back, not visiting, not negotiating, moving in. According to the defense, this wasn't reconciliation, it was displacement. If Johnathan moved into that house, Deviere would lose everything: his marriage, his home, his role in the family, his control over the future. The defense argued that Johnathan's presence threatened to expose the incestuous marriage, destabilize custody arrangements, and force Deviere out entirely. For a young man already emotionally entangled and dependent, this was catastrophic. They pointed out that no camera captured every angle, no system was foolproof. They also raised the issue of the missing murder weapon. Two tools were used in the decapitation: a manual blade and a power tool. The defense argued that someone with access to tools and knowledge of how to use them efficiently fit Deviere's profile far more cleanly than Devon's. And then there was the knife. A butcher knife, used earlier that day, had vanished. No fingerprints, no recovery. The defense suggested it may have been used in the killing and disposed of before police ever arrived. They asked the jury to consider who would have had quiet access to that knife without raising suspicion. They also highlighted inconsistencies in witness timelines. Willette's recollection of when she heard noises shifted between interviews. If the fatal act occurred later than prosecutors claimed, Devon's window of opportunity narrowed, while Deviere's expanded. Finally, the defense attacked the investigation itself. They questioned why luminol testing was never performed, why the footprint in the backyard was never matched, why alternative suspects were cleared rather than deeply investigated. They suggested tunnel vision, that once police focused on Devon, every piece of evidence was interpreted through that lens. In their closing argument, the defense didn't ask the jury to believe Devon was innocent. They asked them to believe reasonable doubt. What if Devon lied, but didn't kill? What if the cleanup happened, but not by her? What if the real killer was the one person investigators were reluctant to accuse? The victim's own son? It was a dangerous strategy, because it required the jury to accept that a young man murdered his father, dismembered him, erased his presence, and then returned home to care for his sisters as if nothing had happened. Prosecutors reminded the jury of a simple, unavoidable truth. Devon Michaels was the last confirmed person to be with Johnathan Willette while he was alive. Not possibly, not maybe. Confirmed by cameras, phone data, receipts, and witnesses. They walked the jury back through August 6th. Johnathan and Devon spent the entire day together. They shopped together. They moved belongings together. They drove together. They were seen together repeatedly on camera, appearing calm, cooperative, even affectionate. There was no sign of fear, no sign of conflict, no sign that Johnathan felt threatened. Then came the critical window. At 10:12 p.m., Devon and Johnathan arrived at the Paladura house. Devon's vehicle was parked. Johnathan went inside. From that moment forward, Johnathan never left that. The prosecution emphasized that Deviere was not there. His phone remained at Porcupine Rim. His truck remained parked. His neighborhood cameras showed no movement. The defense suggested Deviere left his phone behind intentionally. The prosecution dismantled that idea quickly. Leaving a phone behind does not disable network activity. Deviere's phone showed normal usage patterns: passive activity, photo viewing, idle states, consistent with someone at home late at night. There were no gaps suggesting deliberate manipulation, no sudden shutdowns, no suspicious silences. And more importantly, there was no evidence of how Deviere would have traveled 25 miles undetected, murdered his father, disposed of a head, staged a chemical cleanup, and returned home without triggering a single camera or alerting a single witness. The prosecution then turned the spotlight back where it belonged: Devon Michaels. They reminded jurors that Devon left the Paladura house at 2:04 a.m. with Johnathan's cell phone in her possession, a phone that had Johnathan's blood on it. That blood alone destroyed the defense theory. If Devon did not kill Johnathan, then she somehow acquired his phone after his death, got his blood on it, transported it to her home, hid it outside her driveway, and never once reported finding it, all while claiming she left Johnathan alive. The prosecution asked the jury to apply common sense. Why take the phone of a man who is alive? Why conceal his keys and ID in her dresser? Why lie about the engagement ring? Why lie about the gun safe? Why lie about what she took from the house? Because lies were not incidental in this case, they were systematic. The prosecution addressed the decapitation next. They acknowledged what the defense emphasized. The head was missing. The tools were missing. The exact cause of death could not be determined. And then came the final dismantling of the defense's central accusation. If Deviere had committed this crime, the prosecution argued, Devon would have had to help him clean the body, remove the head, dispose of tools, transport bloody items, lie repeatedly to police, plead guilty initially, and then withdraw her plea, all to protect a man she accused of ruining her life. Devon admitted to striking Johnathan. Devon admitted to being present during the fatal window. Devon possessed Jonathan's bloodied phone. Devon controlled the scene after his death, and every critical lie came from her mouth. The question before the jury was no longer who could have done it. It was who did everything necessary to make sure Johnathan Willette never told his own story. After days of testimony, arguments, and competing narratives, the case of Johnathan Willette was finally placed where it belonged, into the hands of 12 ordinary people asked to decide an extraordinary truth. The jury did not deliberate long. In less than 2 hours, they returned to the courtroom. That alone spoke volumes. This was not a case fractured by confusion or paralyzed by doubt. It was a case where the evidence, when viewed as a whole, pointed in one direction, no matter how disturbing that direction was. The foreperson stood. The courtroom went silent. On the charge of first-degree murder with use of a deadly weapon, the jury found Devon Jade Michaels guilty. There were no audible gasps, no outbursts, no visible shock. The verdict felt heavy, but not surprising. When the judge read the verdict aloud, Devon remained composed, but her words afterward revealed something far more telling than any outburst could have. She maintained her innocence, even after the jury's decision, even after the evidence, even after being offered closure through accountability. She chose denial. Sentencing was scheduled for January 8, 2026. Devon Michaels now faces 51 years to life in prison, a sentence that reflects both the brutality of the crime and the deliberate efforts to erase its truth. Johnathan Willette never received the dignity of a proper goodbye. His head was never recovered. His final moments remain partially obscured, not because justice failed, but because someone worked tirelessly to ensure they would be. Yet justice, imperfect as it may be, arrived all the same, because in the end, the truth did not need every detail to survive. It only needed enough. This case forces us to confront an uncomfortable reality. The most dangerous environments are not always loud or chaotic. Sometimes they are calm, functional, smiling for cameras, living ordinary lives while extraordinary damage festers underneath. Johnathan Willette trusted the people closest to him. He believed reconciliation was possible. He believed the family could be rebuilt. That belief cost him his life. Justice, in this case, did not come from a perfect investigation or a neatly wrapped narrative. It came from persistence, from timelines that could not be altered, from evidence that could not be erased, and from a jury willing to look past emotional manipulation and focus on facts. There are still unanswered questions. For the children left behind, for a mother who discovered the unimaginable, and for a man whose final act was trying to bring his family back together, this verdict was not revenge. It was an acknowledgement, a recognition that what happened mattered, that Johnathan Willette mattered. Thank you for staying with this case from beginning to end. If you believe true crime should be told with depth, restraint, and respect for victims, not spectacle, consider supporting the channel. This is Last Witness, where the truth doesn't shout, it waits.